Well, it's actually extremely stable and in favor of Russia. Let's never forget that this is war and war is hell. Um, the enemy always gets a vote. The Ukrainians have been putting up, very steadfast resistance. The enemy can always, throw in some surprise punches, et cetera. And I think that we also have to understand this, Glenn. In addition to the war that's going on in the special military operation, there's an information war taking place today that's unprecedented. The unprecedented conflict you speak of is taking place in the information sphere, being played out on social media platforms, being played out in mainstream media. And the purpose of this information war is to promote the idea that Ukraine somehow has stolen the strategic initiative away from Russia. They've been talking a lot about Ukrainian drone strikes and the effectiveness of these drone strikes, and that Russia is powerless in the face of these drone strikes. And in doing so, create the perception, or at least seek to create the perception, that there's a vulnerability in Russia, political vulnerability that could lead to the demise of Vladimir Putin, and so how Putin's at risk. Um, this is just absurd in the extreme. I mean, yes, there is this information war, but we can parse this out, point by point by point. I'm not picking on you. You, of course, pick your guests as you see fit, but you recently had Gilbert Doctor along, who just spouted the biggest line of horse crap I've ever seen in my entire life, based upon what? Taxi interviews, interviews of real estate brokers, and two old people stuck on a hill in Theodosia because they can't gasoline to come down. And because of this insight that he has, suddenly Russia is collapsing and Vladimir Putin's at risk. This is absurd. Dr. O just published an article yesterday, Russia is losing the war, with an exclamation mark, by the way, to reemphasize the point that Russia is losing. And he cites several things. One, and it's focused on the drone war. This is your question. Let me just set this up. The day I went to St. Petersburg International Economic Forum on June 3rd, 96 drones struck St. Petersburg. The vast majority of them were shot down. 5 got through. They blew up some military targets, some oil structures. In the morning, there was some black smoke visible on the horizon. The people of St. Petersburg didn't give one damn about this at all. There was no panic. Nobody changed their lifestyle. Nobody screamed in the street. There were no demonstrations against Vladimir Putin. The conference went on. The day I left the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, I received a notification on my phone that the internet was going down because of an ongoing Ukrainian drone strike. Life is complicated by these drones. There's no doubt about that. There can be no doubt about that. I went to the special military operation. The day I arrived in Lugansk, the city of Lugansk, air raid sirens were sounding the whole time. That night, Lugansk was struck several times. You could hear the explosions. That next day, we went to Starobelsk, the scene of the murder of 21 students by Ukrainian drones. Drones, brought to their target by Starlink, Elon Musk's technology. While I was in Starobelsk, 2 Ukrainian drones impacted nearby, generating enough concern that I was told to leave Starobelsk. Everywhere I went in this trip, drones were ever-present reality. The last day of the special military operation, the convoy I was in was struck by Hornet drones. These are drones that are built by a company funded by Eric Schmidt, the founder of Google, again, using Starlink technology and connectivity. When you speak to the Russians, they will tell you that this is a complicated war, very complicated war. I interviewed numerous Russian drone operators, drone commanders, drone specialists, drone research and developers, drone technicians, experts on modern drone warfare. And they all said the same thing. The Ukrainians are very good at what they do, very good at what they do. But when they said it, they didn't say it in the tones of somebody playing the New England Patriots with Tom Brady at the quarterback, going, Tom Brady's very good. We don't have a solution for Tom Brady. He's picking us apart. We're going to lose this game. No, Ukrainians are good, but we're better. And we're winning. I interviewed Dmitry Rogozhin, the former head of Roscosmos, current commander of Bar Sarmat, a drone brigade, who runs a technology center. And he said, for instance, on the Hornet, it's a very effective weapon, he said. The Ukrainians are doing some interesting things with it. They're using Starlink and some AI technologies. Then he chuckled and talked about how they were going through the debris reverse engineering. He said, we got the solution. We already solved the problem. And so while the West is promoting how the Hornet is creating the highway of death, the Russians have already solved the problem, but the West doesn't talk about that. The fact that every Ukrainian problem presented has come up with a Russian solution, and the Russian solution further projects the advantage in favor of Russia. Never forget that the FP-1 drones that Ukraine uses to strike Russian energy structures have a 60-kilogram high explosive warhead. You know what that sound it makes when it hits a Russian oil refinery? Pop. Do you know how solid they are? You live in Norway. Go to a Norwegian oil refinery. Take a look at the construction. Tell me what kind of steel they use in these high pressure vessels, et cetera. But the kind of steel that will be destroyed by pop, or does it take a boom? Because every time I check, not a single Russian refinery has been permanently shut down. Every Russian refinery is brought back on order. The Moscow refinery was hit. They have two, I think AB6 and I think Euro X. Refining units. AB6 was shut down primarily because it's also going to be upgraded. It's being upgraded as we speak. People never do the follow through. Geopolitical never does the follow through to understand why things are what they are. They're replacing the unit with a new modern unit that's already been programmed to be much more efficient. But they also brought the Euro refining back up within a matter of days. And so there was no permanent cessation. Samara was shut down, brought back in a matter of days. This is the reality. The FP-1 drone that is being used is not high technology. Dr. O calls it advanced German technology guided by American intelligence. Oh, shoot, the Russians should surrender right now because it's over. It's not advanced German technology. It's a plywood drone that flies 60 miles an hour. You know what the solution to the FP-1 drone is? It's not, as people say, oh, they're going to destroy Russian air defense because the Pantsir missile, there's not enough of them. They don't need them. The Russians now have roving gun crews. They're out there hunting them down. They have their own counter-drone units that are flying, shooting them down as they come in. The Ukrainians lost 555 of these drones. Less than 5 make it to their target. That tells you the Russians are doing something good. Layered air defense. They got this thing solved. Meanwhile, the factories that produce the FP-1 drones are disappearing. Lindsey Graham visited a factory. You saw the photograph of him beaming, holding one of those advanced Ukrainian anti-drone drones in his hand. It's over. Hell, the Ukrainians got the technology, right? No, they don't have the factory anymore. It's gone. And all Ukrainian factories are gone. They're going away because the Russians are winning this war. Have the Russian drone factories gone away? No. Every once in a while, Ukrainian FP-1 drone slips through and goes pop, pop, pop goes the weasel. That's it. There's nothing the Ukrainians do right now that gives them the advantage on anything. They're losing across the board. They're losing on the battlefield. The Russians are advancing, slaughtering Ukrainians. On drone warfare, one of the reasons why the Ukrainians lose is that, again, the West won't talk about this. The Russians hold what they call the ISR advantage. They have overwatch over the totality of the battlefield. And the Russians have used AI in their command and control in a way that the West doesn't even understand right now. They have maximized the rapidity of analysis of imagery coming from a variety of sources. And so any glitch in the pattern of life analysis, anything that shows, oh, a drone system could be operated here, instantly, is instantly responded with a Russian strike. Artillery, if it's depending on where it's at, could be an Iskander, it could be another missile, it could be Fab 500 bombs. But the Ukrainians on a daily basis are losing 8 to 10 Ukrainian or drone command centers, 8 to 10. Each one of those has half a dozen to a dozen soldiers. These soldiers take 4 weeks to try to do the basic training for a drone operator, 6 months for them to become proficient. On a daily basis, the Ukrainians are losing 80 to 100 of their best drone operators, 80 to 100 every single day, and they're not being replaced. Nobody talks about this. There's a deficit right now in what the Ukrainians can do. So the fact of the matter is, what's going on right now is an information operation designed to convince not the West, because the West will buy any lie told, and Russia doesn't care about the West. But there is an element inside Russia, 10 to 15% of the population, who are still somewhat sympathetic to Western liberal values. People like Ksenia Sobchak. She runs a major thing. She just interviewed me. She's somebody who some people would say hates Russia, but I don't say she hates Russia. I think she has a different vision of Russia, a Russia that is strategically aligned with the West, a Russia that is culturally aligned with the West. And she doesn't believe in the SMO. She doesn't support the SMO. And I think she secretly believes that Vladimir Putin's been in power too long and needs to be replaced. But how do you get rid of Vladimir Putin? You have to create the perception that he's somehow vulnerable. And right now we have a thematic taking place in the West. Gilbert Doctorow is one of the leading proponents of this, that a window of vulnerability opens up on September 20th in the elections in the Duma. Do you understand that Putin is not going to be kicked out of power on September 20th? Does everybody understand that this man's popularity raising is in the high 70s. It could possibly go back up into the 80s because the Russians will rally behind their leadership. They will not abandon their leadership, especially an effective leader, a beloved leader like Vladimir Putin. So this is just false hope. The notion, and again, there's people that say, that Putin is vulnerable because Russia's history shows he's vulnerable. They cite Gorbachev, Yeltsin, they cite the Wagner revolt to show that there's this vulnerability, that the military could be swayed over. They're just absolute misreads. You're comparing apples and oranges. Putin has never been more secure today in power than he is today. There's no chance of any window of vulnerability. There is no meaningful counter. Gilbert Doctorow uses interesting, analytical models, some of which are derived from watching Russian TV. Glenn, you watch Russian TV. You understand that Russian TV is a business. Okay? Do you think that 60 Minutes, The Big Game, Solo Live is about providing fact-based analysis to the Russian people, or is it entertainment, news as entertainment designed to attract viewership? And how do you entertain? Not by going out there giving cold, hard facts. You entertain with controversy. You have to have controversy. And Russia TV generates controversy. And to sit there and say, I watch Russian TV, therefore I have my finger on the pulse of Russian society and Russian politics, is the dumbest thing I've ever heard of in my life. I'm frustrated by this, Glenn, because I just came back from Russia. And I feel as somebody who, has spent my life, my adult life doing high stakes, high grade intelligence analysis. I mean, I've been trained by the best, the American intelligence community at its prime. I've received classified commendations from the director of the CIA for my analytical products. My analytical products have been briefed to presidents of the United States, to prime ministers around the world, to secretary generals, to commanders of military forces. And I have a track record that's about, over 95% correct. But the thing about being a good analyst is your ability not to be married to, something, say, oh, I got this right, therefore this is what I'm going to embrace, but is to absorb new data and rethink through your analytical methodologies and say, has things changed? And I do that all the time. The one thing I would never do is become prisoner of Russian television. What an absurdity. The sources I use are Russian generals, Russian colonels, Russian majors, Russian captains, Russian sergeants, Russian soldiers. I interview them consistently over time. I interview senators. I interview representatives of the Duma. I interview industry leaders. I interview people affiliated with academia. I interview people affiliated with the foreign ministry, with the defense ministry. I don't interview taxi drivers. I get interviewed by taxi drivers as I drive to and fro in Moscow. Some confuse me with Tucker Carlson. God bless them. But the idea that I would sit here and come on your show and tell you that I'm going to give you analysis because I talked to two movers who were moving the furniture out of my house. I talked to an 80-year-old person because they're in Feodosia, stuck on a hill because they have no gasoline, and I watch Russian TV, and this gives me the ability. This is the reason why I bring up Doctorow is that he is endemic of the problem. The problem is the mainstream media and social media are relying upon people who aren't providing sound analysis, people who are playing into a thematic that is popular, that gets clicks right now, that does something, but it's not giving you the truth. The truth of Russia is this. It's the political establishment has never been stronger. The certainty of victory on the battlefield has never been more certain. The strategic initiative has shifted completely in favor of Russia. Stop believing what you hear about the energy. There is no energy crisis. There's an energy hiccup, but everything's being managed. All those gas lines you see, they don't exist anymore, Glenn. They go away within 3 days because the Russians reallocate resources. And suddenly gas is available. Because gas is available because what? They stop exporting gasoline. People say, well, that's a sign of Russian weakness. Russia hasn't been exporting gasoline for many years now because of the sanctions, because of war. Only recently they started exporting gas, but now they have to stop because of drone strikes. Drone strikes are causing a problem. But the guidance system that takes the drones to the Russian oil refineries, which the CIA called their magic weapon, they didn't name it back when they published, remember that article they published in 2024, at the same time they launched a drone strike to assassinate Vladimir Putin? It's Starlink. Glenn, Starlink's not working right now in many places in Ukraine. Ask yourself why. I know the answer. I know because I was there, and I talked to the people who are hunting Starlink. There are 3 strategic paths that Russia's taking to nullify Starlink as an effective communication vector, and they're all coming into play except one. One is called shredding. Russia could shut down Starlink today, right now, as we speak, take it out by shredding it, simply putting something up in space and shredding the constellation. That would be the end of Starlink and all of American military communications connectivity. It's a huge vulnerability. Russia's not doing it. Why? Because Russia's not panicked. Russia is using alternative vectors to shut down Starlink, and it's working. Ask the Ukrainians why their drones aren't flying right now in certain areas, because they can't fly, because Russia shut down Starlink. Ask them why their numbers, why their the success rate of the FP1 is dropping to the ground, because Russia's shooting them down. Russia's solved the problem. Why is the Hornet flying? The drone war is being won by Russia. I'm telling you, this is a statement of fact from somebody who just came from the special military operation, interviewed the Russian drone operators, and watched firsthand what's happening. Now, this doesn't mean that the Ukrainians aren't having effectiveness. This is a war. War is hell. And the Ukrainians are doing a good job. They're very brave. But they're losing 80 to 100 of their best drone operators a day, and they don't have anybody to replace them.
Well, one thing which has changed, though, is the Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov. He was making the point that the special military operation was now shifting towards war because of NATO's deepening involvement. I was wondering, well, I guess a twofold question. How do you see the extent of NATO's involvement now in the war? And I guess, is it growing as well? And what's the meaning, or how valuable is what Peskov said? Does it mean much, or is it more of a personal position, or does it mark any shift in the thinking of the Kremlin?
Well, the thinking of the Kremlin is measured by Vladimir Putin. So let's wait till Vladimir Putin articulates a statement. Peskov is a spokesperson who goes out and answers questions. Sometimes he gets ahead of the skis. Sometimes his job is to plant a seed of thought. So you just had a major NATO summit. And I think Russia needed to be seen as responding to the NATO summit. And so rather than thinking NATO, that they got a free ride, they got to say all these things and posture against Russia without consequence, the Russians have come back with several statements. Remember, when France talked about sending Rafale fighters with nuclear weapons to Finland, the response was Finland now has become a nuclear target. Does that mean that Russia has restructured its entire nuclear profile? They said, no, it just means that they made a statement. You're talking about something, we're putting a marker on the table. NATO comes out, talks about more money to Ukraine, talks about joint production, et cetera. And Peskov's making the simple statement that this makes you a direct party to a war, this changes the nature of the conflict. But there has been no legal change in it. Regardless of what Peskov said, it's a special military operation. It continues to be a special military operation with all the restrictions that are attached to that in terms of what Russia can or won't do, or et cetera. Russia has expanded its target deck. They're using a different algorithm, which takes into account the dual use capabilities. This is why you see furniture factories that Russia has known for some time have been reconfigured as drone factories being destroyed, because Russia's now saying, well, we have no choice but to hit these dual use. But Russia before was playing a perception game. We don't want to be perceived as striking civilian targets. But now they're blowing everything up that has a military connotation, because NATO has changed its own profile, its own behavioral patterns. But let's take a look at what NATO actually did in there. Let's start off with the fact that NATO is not unified. Come on, Glenn, you know that Donald Trump made a parting shot at Greenland. Do you really think that NATO is going to stand by and let the United States seize Greenland from Denmark? The answer is no. Spain, the last time I checked, was a member in good standing of NATO. Donald Trump now is cutting all ties. Is that how NATO members treat each other? Turkey still has huge problems with Greece, 2 NATO members. France has problems with Turkey. Ankara was a facade. It was fake. It was theater, political theater. What did NATO commit to? The money they talk about pouring into Ukraine isn't going to Ukraine, but being invested into European defense industry, ostensibly to the benefit of Ukraine. But many of the technologies they're talking about investing in require lead times of 2, 3, 4 years. Ukraine's losing the war right now. Nothing that was agreed to in Ankara will have any impact on the battlefield this summer, this fall, this winter, when Ukraine loses this war. Meanwhile, the Russians are taking apart Ukraine's energy infrastructure. They talked about a dark winter last year. Well, what do you think this is going to be? There's going to be a dark summer already at the peak of air conditioning season. Russia's taking on infrastructure. The Ukrainian people are suffering today. You talk about Russian gas shortages throughout Ukraine. There are gas shortages because Russia is devastating the infrastructure, devastating supplies. This is the reality. Everything that came out of NATO was a facade, was fake, up to and including Donald Trump saying, we're going to let you license production of the Patriot. Really? I can guarantee you this, Glenn, not a single Patriot will ever be licensed inside Ukraine. It's a physical impossibility. First of all, because you got to put in, what, a 60,000 square foot or 600,000 square foot factory built from scratch because it's got to do certain things. You think the Russians are going to sit there? I just told you the Russians have ISR dominance over Ukraine. They watch everything. So they're going to sit there and go, hey, yeah, go ahead and build that factory. We'll stand, but don't worry about us. You send in all your technicians, build that factory. You need to install specialized equipment? Please do that. Testing, test it all away. We'll do nothing. We'll let it happen. And then we'll let you establish your supply lines, all of which have to go through specific, checks, and quality control checks, et cetera. And then they're going to let them actually assemble Patriots and take those Patriots to operational units. You understand that factory will never get built. Has no chance of being built. No insurance underwriter is going to fund that. This is a joke, and already it's recognized as a joke. This is why Zelensky's in panic, running around saying, hey, I got to hold you to your word. You promised me license-built Patriots. And he's realizing there will be no license-built Patriot. The best he's going to get is Patriot GEMTs produced by Germany that will be assembled in Germany using German parts, and they will be sent across the border. Well, they will be blown up in a warehouse before they're ever launched. This is the reality of it. The United States says we're sending in PAC-3 Patriots, the ones they need to shoot down. Because you understand the GEMT shoots down nothing. Maybe a caliber now and then. It can't handle Zircon Kinzhal. It can't handle the Iskander. So the Russians are hitting Ukraine today. There is no air defense in Ukraine, which means there's no air defense umbrella for any of the things that Ukraine wants to happen. Everything will be destroyed by Russia on Russia's terms. Ukraine cannot rebuild. Ukraine is not rebuilding. This is the reality of the conflict. Ankara was a joke, an absolute joke. And you will watch as quickly as everybody talked about Ankara and patted themselves on the back, it's already happening. The spirit of Ankara is disintegrating as we speak. The big thing that happened was Donald Trump's emotional instability projected him hard right back towards Ukraine. How long do you think he's going to be a friend of Zelensky? What happens when Zelensky starts complaining about Patriots and licensing production? Donald Trump's going to call him what he's always called him, ungrateful. Ungrateful. And then the reality of the global energy crisis is going to slap him in the face again, and he's going to have to grant Russia the ability to sell oil. And when Scott Bessent says we need to ratchet down oil, he's going to say we can't. We have to have Russian oil in the market to stabilize the global energy markets. Instability all over, unpredictability. This is what Ankara was. People cannot misread what happened in Ankara. It was an absolute disaster for NATO.
On the NATO involvement, though, we saw, you probably caught those two Russian pranksters, Vuvan and Lexus. They were prank calling, I think they had a top advisor of the Estonian leadership, and they essentially, got him to say that Estonia was assisting to some extent in where the drones were hitting. And again, this kind of, I think most people saw the Baltic states in some way being involved in the attacks on St. Petersburg. And again, after these Russian pranksters, they got this admission from the Estonians. We saw Maria Zakharova making the comment that this kind of proves that Estonia is now involved in terrorism against Russia. Now, I thought this was remarkable, not because, I think everyone knows the involvement of the Baltic states, but once Russia recognizes this, says it out loud, they immediately put a lot of pressure on themselves to do something about it. Do you see this changing the dynamic anyway? Because again, the Russians remain cautious, and I'm a bit surprised because there's been a lot of talk about the need to restore their deterrent, that NATO has stepped way over the line, and now they say, well, here is the evidence. But do you see it shifting anything, or where's this heading?
Well, first of all, understand this. Before the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, Narushkin, the head of the SVR, his press service put out a report that said that the Russians were aware of, I think, 9 facilities being built by Latvia on behalf of Ukraine to facilitate drone launches. They said, we know where these are, and if you do this, we can hit them. And so, I mean, Vova and Alexis are good friends of mine. I love these guys. And they do, I always joke to them that I think they're working for the SVR because the things they do is better than any intelligence service. They're able to get deep insights into the true thinking of the West, which is shown to be duplicitous, liars, can't be trusted. But the idea that you need Vova and Alexis to tell you that Latvia is behaving poorly. The Russians knew this. When the drone struck St. Petersburg, Russia tracked it the whole time. They knew they were going out to the Gulf of Finland, coming in. None of this took Russia by surprise. Now, I've been a proponent for some time now about striking Europe. You know this. I've said it on your program. Shoot the dog. Hell, I gave a speech at St. Petersburg International Economic Forum where I said, shoot the dog. Got a standing ovation, except from everybody except the Russian diplomats who went, nah, we're not going to do that. But I thought that Vladimir Putin was going to come to the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum and say, I'm shooting the dog. Because why not? Narushkin said, they've got it. Then, they've got these sites, and then we saw those sites being used to send drones to attack St. Petersburg. So I thought for sure Putin would do that. He shocked me. The entire speech that he gave at St. Petersburg made no reference to the Ukrainian conflict at all. And this opened up an insight. Remember I told you the key about being a good analyst is be able to sit back and take in new data and say, because the only voice that matters in Russia is Vladimir Putin's voice. That's the only voice that matters. Now, I mean, he listens to other voices, but the decisions are made by him, not by Peskov, not by Lavrov, not by Gerasimov, by Putin. And so I'm listening to Putin saying, where's he going? I'm expecting fire and brimstone. I'm expecting him to say, as I speak, give me the button. Boom, there goes Latvia, Estonia. And I would have cheered because I thought it was the right thing to do. That's because I was ignorant. Because I was listening to too much Russian TV. I was listening to too many Russian pundits. I was listening to too much Russian social media. I thought that was the pulse of Russia. The pulse of Russia comes from the pulse of the president. The president said, this war will not define us. What defines us is economic stability and economic growth. That the future of Russia is its economy. And he sat there and he made a pitch for investments. It was a good pitch because $84 billion worth of investments were garnered from the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. But his focus was, we are moving forward. Now, then he turned around in question and answer and talked about the special military operation. But it was stunning because he basically turned to the military and gave a Stalin-esque type order to the admirals, to the generals, to the marshals, boom, go forward, do your duty, da-da-da-da-da. Standard stuff. Then he finished in a way that only a president who was totally in tune with the Russian soldiers could have finished. Работаем, брат. Keep working, brothers. That comes from the Dagestani police officer who was executed live by terrorists. They said, do you have anything to say? He said, Работаем, брат. Keep working, brothers. And that's become the rallying cry of Russians everywhere in the streets as they come together. Работаем, брат. The two soldiers say, Работаем, брат. That's it. Keep working, brothers. Russia's more united than I've ever seen before, and they're not going to let this war dictate the priorities of Russia. And why is this important? Yes, I'm not an international lawyer, but I know enough about international law to know that I can make a cognizable claim under Article 51, self-defense, citing the Carolina Clause for preemptive self-defense, so that Russia could take out the Baltic states right now as we speak, legally. Hell, they don't even have to make that case for Germany because Germany is an enemy state under the United Nations Charter, and Germany's rearming in a way that replicates patterns of behavior linked to prohibited behavior, and Russia can take them out anytime they want to, legally. Russia is right to point out that all of these nations are parties to the conflict, and therefore Russia has a legal right to strike. But again, let me get back to what I said at the beginning. Nothing NATO is doing is moving the needle on the battlefield. Nothing they're doing. So now you're Russia, you're Vladimir Putin, whose number one job is to keep Russia on track towards stability and economic growth, because that is the future of Russia. Forget all the people that sit there and say, oh, Russia wants global instability in the energy markets because they make money off of higher energy costs, right? The price of oil goes up and Russia makes money. You don't understand that Russia, I think the total percentage of GDP from oil sales is 20%. Russia makes money off of economic growth across the spectrum of Russia, including energy, but other ways as well. And a lot of that growth is dependent upon investments. And people aren't going to invest when you have high energy prices. You can't, because the high energy prices create inflationary pressures that are detrimental to investment climate. No one will invest in Russia with high energy prices. No one will invest in Russia. And that's the exact opposite track that Putin is trying to take Russia. So Putin's not looking for instability to exploit global. Putin's looking for long-term predictability in the global investment environment. That's what he's looking for. And when you're winning the war against NATO across the board, why would you decide to change the algorithm that's producing victory? Because again, propaganda doesn't win wars unless you allow it to rot it from in. That's mental warfare. Andrei Levitsky has talked about it. People should study what he writes. But you know, if the goal is to get Russia to doubt itself to the point where they have a Moscow Maidan moment in Putin's, then that's a goal in vain, because it's not going to happen. Putin is not going to attack NATO unless NATO does something precipitous. Right now, NATO's not in a position to do anything precipitous. There's a lot of attention paid on Germany. And why not? You have to respond. In the information warfare game, when Germany publishes a white paper projecting the potential of warfare in 2029, when Pistorius talks about expanding the military from 148,000 to nearly 500,000, you have to respond. You have to say this is bad. But the reality is, Russia doesn't have to do anything. You know that Olaf Scholz asked for 100 billion euro back in 2022 to magically refurbish the German military, which was basically destroyed. Destroyed by Ursula von der Leyen, I believe, who was at one time affiliated with the Ministry of Defense. That 100 billion went in and nothing happened, because Germany's so fundamentally broken that 100 billion euro couldn't even begin the process of rebuilding. Now they're talking about tripling the size of their military with what manpower? 60% of the German men of military age say, we're not going to fight. You want to have a draft? The quickest way to get Merz voted out of office is to instill a draft. Will never happen. Merz has no political viability. He's finished. He's done. There's no future. The future of Germany will be dictated by Alternative for Deutschland, which will be a part of a coalition and eventually maybe even dominating a coalition down the road. And they're not going to continue this path. Everything Germany's doing is a joke. Their technologies don't work. Their industries don't work. This is the reality. Why would Putin attack Germany today? You attack Germany, you run the risk of altering the algorithm that is guaranteeing your success. Let NATO score political points in social media. Who cares what Ukrainian bots say in X? Who cares what the Wall Street Journal, Newsweek, New York Times says? Who cares what anybody says? The only reality is the reality on the ground. And on the ground, the Russian army is advancing, slaughtering the Ukrainians in numbers. This crap about 35,000 dead Russians a month, it's just stupid, stupid. The Russians are suffering casualties. Of course they are. This is war. It's a new kind of war. It's drone warfare. But the idea that the Ukraine, we can document 25 to 35,000 Russian casualties a month, no, they can't. It's a straight up lie, part of the information warfare that's going on. The Russians, on the other hand, can document that they are slaughtering the Ukrainians in similar numbers. And one of the things you have to learn about Ukrainian numbers, they tend to project their own casualties onto Russia. That's been something they have historically done. And so what we have to know is that the Ukrainians are suffering 25 to 35,000 casualties a month. And they're TCC guys who go around, bump people on the head and kidnap them. They can't kidnap 25,000, 35,000 a month. There's a manpower deficit in Ukraine right now, and it's of strategic proportions. This is the fact. So there is no pressure on Vladimir Putin to attack NATO. There's nothing coming from the Ministry of Defense. There are people on the periphery who are saying things. Karagonov is famous for, promoting things like this. But Vladimir Putin spoke at St. Petersburg. Why don't people listen to him? Why don't you trust the Russian president when he speaks about Russia? And he basically said, we're not going to let this war define where we're going. He's not panicked. There's no panic. There's no panic among the Russian people. And any panic you see in the Russian media sphere is entertainment-driven, controversy designed to garner views, clicks, etc. The only voice that matters is Vladimir Putin. So far, Vladimir Putin has been consistently calm and in control. There's no panic.
I know you have to run now. I just had a very brief question though. How long do you think this war can continue now? Like how long can they hold on? Because we see things deteriorating a bit, as you said on the front line. There's a lot of front lines where the Russians are now just punching through. How long do you think the Ukrainians will be able to hold on here? I mean, there's a lot of variables at play. So I know one should be careful to make predictions, but
Look, I mean, these are unknowns. The problem is, when does the structure collapse? You place a structure under tremendous pressure, and the structure starts to weaken. But structures are designed to reinforce each other and reinforce and stay in. When will the structure collapse? The structure will collapse when it's incapable of sustaining the load. Ukraine continues to receive considerable infusion of capital from the West, which means as Russia takes down load-bearing mechanisms, they're reinforced or new mechanisms run in, changing the thing. Logic dictates that Ukraine can't hold out much longer, but I've been saying this for years, and Ukraine has held out because what we don't know is what the West is doing. There's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes in terms of the infusion of capital, et cetera, that are unknowns. The key thing here that people have to understand is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Russia will do this forever. Again, listen to the Russian leadership. They cited the war with Sweden. I forget how long it took to defeat Sweden, 30 years? It's not going to take Russia 30 years. But the idea that Russia is sitting there saying, we got to win by this calendar date, they've never done that. Russia has never put a calendar date up there. It's all based upon operational objectives. And Russia has done some things that people need to understand. The Anchorage compromises are over. You heard Vladimir Putin. Sumy is a Russian city. You understand what that means, don't you? Sumy is Russian. Kharkov is a Russian city. You do know what that means, don't you? And Odessa is a Russian city. This war doesn't end in a way that's going to be good for Ukraine. Ukraine will be destroyed by this. Denazification is a reality. And denazification means the literal liquidation of everybody. Vladimir Putin has said, we are collecting names. Your names are on the list. We will hold you to account. Take him at his word. This is why there will not be a Zelensky government post-conflict. Zelensky will be dead or in jail or run away. Syrskyi is gone. Zaluzhny, history. Budanov. All of these players are dead men walking. They have no future. Anybody affiliated with the Nazi regime, the Banderist regime, is gone. There will be no rump state in West Ukraine. Lvov, sort of a bastion of Banderist ideology. Every single Banderist in Ukraine will be eradicated. That's how this war ends. You say, how long will it take? It doesn't matter. It will take as long as needed. Vladimir Putin is looking for long-term stability. That means that this war cannot end in a way that allows it to be rekindled 5-10 years down the road. When this war is over, a red line is drawn. That means it will never happen again. And that's the foundation of stability Putin needs to be doing the growth going forward. People need to put that in their thick skulls. Vladimir Putin cares about everybody in Russia. But the idea that he's going to dramatically change the trajectory he's on because two people in Feodosia are stuck on a hill without gasoline is the dumbest thing I ever heard in my entire life.